All rise. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. Circuit Court in and for the 12th Judicial Circuit of the state of Florida is now open and convened, with judges attending en banc for the dedication of the Judge Gilbert A. Smith Sr. Jury Assembly Room. All are invited to draw near and give attention, as court is now in session. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated and come to order. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Judge of the 12th Judicial Circuit, the Honorable Charles Williams.
Thank you all, and welcome, and good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to a very, very special occasion. We are today honoring what I think is one of the finest people, not just judges, finest person that I've ever had an opportunity to meet. And so emotionally, this is a very special day for me, and I'm sure for the family. Today, we are going to honor Judge Gilbert A. Smith Sr., who served the 12th Judicial Circuit from 1971 until 1998. So at this time, I would ask all of us to please stand while the Honorable Judge Paul Logan gives the invocation. Judge Logan.
Please join me in prayer. Almighty God, we gather to dedicate this jury assembly room in honor of Judge Gilbert A. Smith Sr. We are grateful and thankful for Judge Smith, a Floridian born and raised, husband, father, grandfather, for being part of the greatest generation serving our country in World War II, and for his distinguished legal career highlighted by his public service to the state of Florida, 20 years as attorney for the State Road Department and Turnpike Authority, and 20 years service as a circuit judge, including 8 years as chief judge, and then 7 years as a senior judge following his retirement. Above all, we are particularly grateful and thankful for Judge Smith's commitment to the rule of law and for his sense of fairness and justice, serving as an example for all who appeared before him. And most especially, we give thanks for his patience with and selfless encouragement of new lawyers. We pray that those called for jury duty will be inspired by this place and Judge Smith's example to serve faithfully and to strive to be both fair and just. We ask your blessing upon this room and all present, especially the participants in this program. And gracious God, we commend our nation to your merciful care and protection. We pray that you will guide us and give us wisdom to pursue what is just and true and good, according to your will. We pray in your name. Amen.
I would ask that you continue standing, please, while the color guard, presented by Troop 22 of the Boy Scouts of America, will present the colors. I'll also ask Sheriff Rick Wells to come forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Color guard, left face. Color guard, present the colors.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Color guard, post the colors. Color guard, perform and return.
Okay, you may be seated. For those of you who may or may not know, Judge Smith Sr. was a supporter of Troop 22 for most of his life, and both of his sons were in the program. Presenting the color guard for Boy Scout Troop 22 were Tanner Cloud, Chris Genowick, Charlie Landers, Julius Rodriguez, and Andrew White. Thank you so much. We have some special guests here today, including Judge Smith's wife, Alpha, who I've come to know and love over the years, and the Smith family. So I'd ask all of the Smith family to please stand and be recognized, please. Thank you. We also have Mavis Hensley here. And Mavis, we recognize you, and we thank you for being here also. And your husband, again, was such a deserving person of the honors that he has accumulated over the years. Thank you for being here. We have many of our senior circuit judges and retired circuit judges that are present. I want to thank them for being here. I also want to recognize all of the elected officials that are in the audience. And I would like to invite at this time from the Manatee County Board of County Commissioners, Priscilla Trace, to come forward and make a few comments.
Good afternoon. I'm Priscilla Trace, Manatee County Commissioner. I had a beautiful speech written, but changed my heart this morning on what to say. I'm a native Manatee County folk. My family's been here a long, long time. And things that have happened in my personal life has made me think about legends and this generation of men that we can be so proud of. My father was one of those. Never had the privilege of knowing Mr. Smith, but everything I've read on the proclamations and the nice speech that I had made me think of this generation. Here was a man from Arcadia. No offense, we don't really think much of Arcadia. Most of the time when we think of it, it's a cow town. Has been, always will be, and hopefully it stays that way. I personally love it. Know lots of folks there. But a young man from Arcadia graduates from high school. And what does he do? He says, I'm going to serve my country. He served his country. Did it well. Came back and said, now it's time to be a man. Didn't whine, didn't say I can go do something better. And he went and got a job, went to school, and became the man that we can all be proud of. Worked in y'all all know his history. Y'all can read it, y'all probably know it better than myself. But this is a generation that said, I will serve. I will help my community. I will do what it takes to take care of my youth. This generation mentored children. They didn't even know it was called mentoring. They called it making boys into men. That's what they called it. And I know that because Mr. Smith, Gilbert, your dad and my dad had a lot in common. They were people that cared. And I'm, like I said, very proud of the legends, the people that grew up in this state and that I knew, such as my father. So y'all that didn't know him, Irving Stewart, Peter Harley. These were legends. And now I can add one that even though I didn't know, I'm part of this ceremony, and I feel like at least have felt like I've known him, Mr. Smith, Judge Smith. So as we're sitting here today, let's just remember that we can learn from our elders. These are good men that did things the right way, always. Not just when they were called and asked for, but they lived their life that way. And I'm very happy to be honored to speak here today and name this the Gilbert Smith Jury Room. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, we have a special presentation, a short video about Judge Smith, and I want to thank Manatee Educational Television and Charles Clapsaddle for putting this together. So let's take a look.
I think I've known Judge Gilbert A. Smith Sr. my whole life. I remember what a good friend he was to my family. I remember a lot about his work in our community as our judge. He was always fair, always honest, operated with the highest level of integrity. I can remember stories of people coming out of his court, and while they weren't particularly excited about the outcome, they always viewed him as being a very fair judge, and that's what really matters in life.
D-Day we towed across what they call a rhino barge, which is probably 200 feet long, 50 feet wide, and with tanks joined together with a diesel engine on the back, like a kicker. Outboard motor, only a lot bigger. And we loaded, pulled it around to the front of the ship, lowered the ramp, and put some armor on it and a lot of men and all our small boats. We had 6 LCVPs, which were landing barge, small ship boats, like 40, 50 feet long. And they went in, and we couldn't see the coast from where we were at, actually. We could hear the battleships pounding the coast and the cruisers and the battleships. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. And we laid off all day, the first day, and our troops went in. And then we went in the second day, actually hit the coast. The coast of France, the tides are terrific, like 18 or 19 feet. So we went on high tide, and the tide went out, and you could actually walk around the ship. We were at Omaha Beach, which was a bad beach, the one with the cliffs. And it was secure the time we went in the second day. They had moved past the beach.
He was a great trial lawyer. I learned a lot from him, practical things. Rule number 1, I think, was don't think you're so damn important. If you look like you're the smartest man in the courtroom, 2 things. Number 1, people know you think about that, and number 2, it's probably not true. So with that kind of admonition, which I think he carried on to the bench, of not thinking yourself the most important or the smartest person in the courtroom, he went to great lengths on the bench, I know, to see that there was a affirmative action in the judiciary in terms of employment of people. And he was just that way. That's the way he grew up, and it was really him.
We were trying this condemnation case in LaBelle, and back in those days, that was in the 50s, they didn't have any restaurants in LaBelle. They had a general store that sold sandwiches. But at 12 o'clock, he'd recess and he'd take all the jury and the lawyers on both sides, and the jail's behind the courthouse. And we'd walk over there, and the sheriff would feed us all.
You'd sit out on picnic tables?
Yeah, well, they had a dining room in there, you know, I mean, where the prisoners ate.
I did a criminal trial, my second trial with Judge Smith in 1975, I guess it was, maybe 76. The prosecutor ended up being Judge Adams. During the trial, the prosecutor asked the witness to point out the guy that stole the tuna fish from the 7-Eleven. The witness pointed directly at me and said, "That's him." I got a little nervous. I asked the judge could the record reflect that the witness was pointing to the defendant? He looked at me and paused and said, "Mr. Lutz, we're going to leave that one up to the jury, but good luck."
When I became a circuit judge 37 years ago, a little over 37 years ago, we had 5 circuit judges. We had Judge Hensley and Judge John Justice, Judge Silvertooth, and Roy Dean, and I was the 5th one. And we had 2 county court of record judges, one in Manatee and one in Sarasota County, and we had 3 county judges. Look at them now.
As a young lawyer just out of law school, I began the practice of law in Judge Smith's courtroom. He was already a legendary judge by the time I got here. And make no mistake about it, you knew when you went into his courtroom, you better pay attention and be prepared, because he took justice seriously. He could be tough, but I doubt toughness was something he was all that concerned with. I remember him more as a compassionate judge who combined a devotion to duty with a common touch of humanity and decency. He created the sense in those who came before him that whatever was going to happen would be fair.
His trial judge has a lot of very high stress. I remember one homicide case that I tried here in Manatee County. It's the Ambrone, which is the death of a 7-year-old boy that his foster parents and adoptive parents starved him and beat him to death. And it was, the facts were so bad that from the opening statements on, it was all downhill for the defendant. But it was the last case I tried, the last homicide case, and I said I'd never try another one. That's how much stress.
One day I get called into his office, which quite frankly was just down the hall. We were all here in the same building in those days. And I figure, you know, I'm in trouble because it's like getting called to the principal's office. So I go into his office and I sit down at his desk. There was a chair right next to the side of his desk, and I sat there, and whatever it was, I don't even remember that part now, but whatever it was, we finished. And then he says to me, "Put your foot up here." I went, "What, sir?" And I put my foot up, and he pulled out of his drawer a shoe polishing kit. And he polished my shoes because it must have driven him crazy. I had scuffed up black shoes. And he just polished them, chatted a bit, and said, "Okay, see you next week," or whatever it was, and walked out. And I was like, man, they don't prepare you for that in law school.
Well, I remember one that I tried in this courtroom. It was in 1956, and Bill Grimes, who was one of the fine lawyers in Bradenton at that time, was on the other side, and the judge was William Harrison, who had been on the circuit bench about 40 years. Anyhow, we were trying this condemnation case, and we picked a 12-man jury. Now, you got to remember, this is 1956. Women were permitted to be on juries in 1949, but not on homicides or condemnation cases until the 60s. But anyhow, we picked a jury on a Monday, and we were proceeding in the trial. And of course, it was hot. It was July or August. The windows were open. The fans were going. And Judge Harrison let the jury take off their coats. He required jurors to wear coats at that time. But he let them take them off, but he wouldn't let the lawyers. We suffered. As we were taking testimony one afternoon, the trucks on, of course, Manatee Avenue always gearing down for the light, and the sound was terrible in here with the windows open. And about that time, a politician came out here on Manatee Avenue and 12th Street at the corner with a bullhorn, making a political speech. And it got so bad that Judge Harrison finally recessed the court until the politician left. That was his words. As I said, Judge Harrison finally recessed it because we couldn't hear anything. And he wasn't very happy at all. He wasn't very happy any time, really.
Although I never met Judge Smith, he significantly contributed to my life. Not long after Judge Smith's death, I was helping my dad move. We came across an old file which had the label, Erica's Custody Papers. Now, throughout my life, I had heard of the custody dispute of which I was the subject. In 1979, Judge Smith broke out of a box in which mothers automatically got custody. I honestly cannot imagine how different my life would be had Judge Smith Sr. made a different decision. Now that I am a judge, I can only hope that I have the same wisdom and courage as he.
The contributions he made, not just to the judiciary and to the care and feeding of younger lawyers, showing what fairness in the courtroom is like, those types of things, but also in the community at large. His work with the Boy Scouts, his work in all kinds of other pursuits, his active role in his church and with his family, a wonderful wife, Alpha, and 4 wonderful children, all of whom have come out with amazing jobs and careers of their own, trying to make all those things better and to do the best job he could, and I admired him greatly.
He was smart, street smart, humble, nice, courteous, took it easy on dumb young lawyers. His was a life well lived. It was my honor and pleasure to know him, and I'm sure gonna miss Judge Smith.
His legacy is lasting. It's lived out through his family. His son, Gilbert Smith Jr., my dear friend, is now our judge and carrying on that family tradition, if you will. But Judge Smith will be sorely missed here on this earth, but what he's done, what he's accomplished, and what he stood for while he was here will live on.
He was a great man, an iconic judge, and my friend. Actually, more than a friend. I owe much of my life to him. My wife Carol and I will also be forever grateful to Alpha Smith for the care she took in making us both feel so welcome and cared for throughout the time I was a judge and until this very day. Alpha, we love you.
I remember specifically the first day I had to come back to the courthouse after he retired. And I remembered I could feel the silence on the floor. That hearty har laugh was gone. And now it's gone forever. And I miss him every day.
Again, I want to thank Manatee Educational Television for presenting that video. I know a lot of work went into it, and certainly I think that video captures the spirit of Judge Smith. We're very fortunate today to have several people who are going to give some tributes to Judge Smith, and I'd like to start with the Honorable Angel Colonneso, the Clerk of the Circuit Court and Comptroller.
Thank you. Judge Gilbert Smith Jr. asked me to share a brief story with you today. 28 years ago, when I was a first brand new deputy clerk in the courtroom, I was trained in the courtroom when Judge Smith happened to be filling in for small claims court that day. And I was sitting second chair while I was being trained on the docket, and things got pretty hectic in the courtroom, and things can move fast in the courtroom. And I was doing my diligence with stamps and everything, and I noticed the bailiff come up and hand Judge Smith Sr. a piece of paper. And for those of you who are young, paper back then was how we relayed jokes. We had no social media. And that's the significance of this, because as I was grateful for the lull to get my stamping and my documenting done, all of a sudden my head is down and I'm concentrating and I'm focused, and I hear the loudest noise next to me. And I jumped and I startled and I jumped out of my skin. I hopped up a little in my seat and I looked to the person next to me. I said, what happened? It was Judge Smith laughing. I was so scared, my heart skipped a beat, but that's how he laughed. That laugh, they say, was contagious. And that it was. And it was part of my training that day. Then I knew to expect it and knew when it was coming. And it was a wonderful laugh. And it was coming from the heart and the sign of a man who thoroughly enjoyed what he did. And I thank Judge Smith Jr. for inviting me to share this story on this special day with you. And I will always remember Judge Smith Sr., and I'll still, in my mind, hear that laugh echoing in the halls of justice in Manatee County. Thank you.
At this time, I'd ask Senior Judge, the Honorable Stephen Dakin, to come forward, please.
What happened to all the other people who were supposed to be in front of me, Chief? For those of you who don't know me, which has got to be just about everybody in the room, my name is Stephen Dakin. I'm a retired circuit judge. I was privileged and pleased to serve with Gilbert for almost his entire judicial career. On the first Tuesday after the first Monday in January of 1973, the 12th Judicial Circuit had 8 circuit judges. With Gilbert's passing last year, sadly, I'm the only one left. 4 of us were newly elected as a result of massive changes to the court system recently passed as amendments to the Florida Constitution. Others had varying degrees of judicial experience. Judge Hensley, of course, had been around, I think, forever by then, wasn't he, Mavis? I was positive. Gilbert had about 2 years. I had been the judge of the county judges court, and I'd gotten appointed by by Governor Askew in February of 1971. And as your program points out, Gilbert got appointed in September. So I always tried to claim that I was senior to him, but I was never successful with that operation. Even though we had various degrees of experience at that time, we all were starting over. Because in addition to the elections that were occasioned by the changes to the Constitution, the entire court system had been radically changed. Gone were municipal courts, Justice of the Peace Court, small claims courts, courts of record, separate juvenile courts in the counties that had separate juvenile courts, and the county court, more properly referred to as the county judges court. Jurisdiction added to the circuit court that it did not have before the changes to Article 5 included probate, guardianship, mental health, juvenile, all felonies from the court of record, and the probate and those things came from the county judges court. And of course, the newly created county judges had jurisdiction over all misdemeanors, traffic, small claims. I served with Gilbert for 20 years. He was a great colleague, was a great friend. He was really just fun to be around, and you could get a sense of that from the video that you saw. And there are Gilbert Smith stories that could be told. Some of them may be even true. But I want to talk this afternoon about a legacy of Gilbert that he really gets very little credit. I take that back. He gets no credit for this. And that is Gilbert's almost single-handed responsibility for creating the Florida Court Educational Trust Fund. Now, for those of you in the room whose first name is not Judge, this will probably mean very, very little to you. If you are a lawyer who files civil actions, $2 of the filing fee does go to the trust fund. To those of us in the room whose first name is Judge, we have all benefited to one degree or another from that because the Education Trust Fund funds all the judicial education programs that are presented here in the state. Some of my colleagues might think that the trust fund has been around forever, and since it was created in 1982, probably for some of them that does feel like forever. But it wasn't. And I think Gilbert's role in it ought to be discussed, so I get to. Those of you who remember how much Gilbert liked to travel. I'm not telling a story here, am I? No. And he enjoyed traveling out of state to various judicial programs conducted out of state. He had been to the National Judicial College in Reno, as had many of us. He had been to programs presented by the Academy of Judicial Education in various locations. He was especially fond of attending the Conference of Metropolitan Courts programs held in various locations, usually metropolitan areas. And the story of how those of us from this circuit got invited to that is another one for another day. It occurred to Gilbert at some point that if a small amount, maybe 50 cents, maybe $1, were added to the filing fees here in the circuit, there would be money to pay for those events and possibly to bring in some outside experts to put on some programs. And so how would this be accomplished? At that time, and maybe today for all I know, there was a special piece of legislation which I think, if I have it right, was called a General Bill of Local Application, something like that. And essentially what it was the legislature in Tallahassee passed the bill, but it only applied locally, in this case to the 12th Judicial Circuit, which just avoided having to have any interference from any of the local municipality governments or any of those folks. And so towards the end of the 1981 legislative session, Gilbert managed to get that bill introduced, at least in the House, I know. I'm not sure about the Senate. And to our surprise and amazement, it got pulled. And it got pulled at the request of Justice Ben Overton, who was the Florida Supreme Court Justice in charge of judicial education, who, by the way, was a very, very committed man and a very fine man. And he had a legitimate concern, which was if the 12th Circuit was successful in this venture, he had faced the possibility of 19 other circuits, I should say, with similar programs, all funding various types of education programs with little or no control by the Supreme Court. And so I don't think that bill in 1981 even got a committee hearing. So Gilbert managed to get the same bill introduced in 1982. But things were different then because Ralph Haben, some of you may remember Ralph from Palmetto. He's got a street named for him up the road here. Ralph was the Speaker of the House. And Ralph had been persuaded by emissaries that Gilbert had sent to him, reportedly told by Gilbert to remind him that there would be life after legislature, but I can't vouch for that story. And Speaker Haben was in support. We had support in the Senate. And Justice Overton, again, with some other folks, including the then chair of the the Circuit Judges Conference, were opposed to it and worked very, very hard to defeat it. But as the session began to wind up, it was clear that it was going to pass this time. And so the suggestion was made to make it apply statewide to all the circuits for all the judges. I don't know that Gilbert was overly enthused about that, but he certainly didn't oppose it, and it passed. And so created was the Florida Court Education Trust Fund. Over the years, various sums have been attributed to it. In its heyday, it had a lot of money to spend, I'm told now, because of the various raids by the legislature on that trust fund, along with a lot of others. It may not have as much. But what was the significance? What was the effect? For the first time, there was a dedicated source of funding that was constant. The court system didn't have to go back to the legislature every year and ask for an appropriation. It was administered by the Florida Supreme Court through its Court Education Council, which some of us have been on over the years. And it allowed funding for the education portions of the business meetings of the Florida Conference of Circuit Judges and County Judges, and later the DCA judges. It allowed the creation and funding of 2 phases of what we refer to as the Judicial College, which is the 2 sets of programs for new judges and rising judges. And Judge Dinkin here is the current dean of that operation. It, of course, allowed for attendance at out-of-state judicial programs, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I took advantage of that opportunity from time to time. In 1992, it helped fund the College of Advanced Judicial Studies, which is a 4.5-day program that consists of courses that last a day, 2 days, 3 days, various specialties, and is considered sort of the crown jewel of our system. Those programs exist today. It also resulted in the state of Florida being one of the top 3 states in the United States in judicial education programs, and thus the envy of all the other 47. So this is Gilbert Smith's legacy, and it probably will last as long, maybe only to be surpassed by the legacy of his children and his grandchildren. Now, would this trust fund have been created anyway? I can't say. But what I can say is that it did happen, and it happened because of Gilbert Smith. And I'm grateful, and so should these people. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Dakin. This time, Attorney Lamar Matthews will give some comments.
Thank you, Judge Williams. May it please the court, members of the court, guests and friends standing all the way to the back. My goodness. I was asked by Judge Gilbert, Jr., if I would talk about Gilbert Smith, Sr. as a lawyer, because he looked around and couldn't find very many people who were still walking and talking with reasonable sentences that were around for that. And I acknowledged that I remembered it well. I've practiced law, 54 years now, I think, and still can walk and talk, and under my wife's strict directions, of course. But so I said, sure, I'll do it. So I'm not going to be as scholarly as Judge Dakin. I never was and never will be. And I'm just going to tell you some things about being with this great man and how I came to know him and love him. I got out of law school in 1964 and was hired by the law firm of Dye, D-Y-E, and Dye. It is still there, still going strong, and I reported for work, and at that time I met one of their newer lawyers named Gilbert Smith. He'd practiced a long time. He'd been 20 years as a condemnation, eminent domain lawyer for the State Road Department, and had just finished his tour of being the head of that project that condemned land for the Florida Turnpike. That goes all the way from Miami up to Orlando and have all the backup jams going to Gator games at that place. And he, Dewey Dye Jr., had secured the representation of the West Coast Inland Navigation District, which was the entity that was buying all the land, underwater and on land, to do our local connection of what was called the Intercoastal Waterway System of the United States. It was one of the last little links. It started in Tarpon Springs and went down to about when they ran out of barrier islands, they shut it down. And his job was to do the condemnation cases. My job as assigned was to be the mostly ignorant step and fetch it second chair, but and we'd had these trials, a number of them. In eminent domain, and this is still the case, you put a whole bunch of parcels together. Most of them are settled. So the first case, I remember doing something that was a little strange and we got a kick out of. You can pick the lawyers for the condemning authority. If there's 50 different parcels, you can pick the name you want on the defense to be the name that's in the paper and everybody does. And so we had, in Sarasota, there was a small parcel of land in the Venice area owned in the name of James R. Hoffa as trustee of the Teamsters Pension Fund. So this was the State of Florida Department of Transportation versus James R. Hoffa et al. And we loved it because on voir dire, when you're talking to the lawyers are talking to the jury, they spent none of their time on valuation or where their property was. It wasn't them. They had nothing to do with it. They'd never seen the property, didn't want to think about it. And it was just fun. Probably not a nice thing to do in hindsight. I hope Gilbert thought of it and I didn't. I would have been afraid to try it. But anyway, got a big kick out of that. The next one was a trial in which Judge Silvertooth was one of about his first eminent domain trial. He had come on the bench, appointed by Governor Bryant, and it was a case in Sarasota County, and it involved a very acrimonious matter. I can't remember the name of the case. I guess it doesn't make any difference. Anyway, it was the one where they condemned the land that went around Venice and took land and created the intercoastal there, which they're now very proud of. And Gilbert loved to say, even up in recent years, that one of the things he liked to laugh about it most was how when they were down there, we were down there checking out the land before the trial and so forth, and had everything but guns shot at us and people yelling about how we were destroying a beautiful land that all of a sudden they now call it the island of Venice. And he said, Matthews, he said, God didn't make that island of Venice. He says, you and I did. He just loved it. And I thought about it. The Senior Friendship Center had a big event down there a couple of months ago we went to, and it's beautiful. You know, it is. They thought it was a great idea at the time. But anyway, so another thing happened in that case. There was a lawyer, some of you older folks remember, a kind and gentle man named John Blair, who had been state attorney, and I don't know what. Anyway, he was representing the other side. And he was getting insulting with Mr. Smith, my senior partner. He'd call him Smith. And I heard myself say, in this first trial I've ever had with Judge Silvertooth, that's Mr. Smith, to which Blair says, all right, Mr. Smith Matthews. I said, and it's Mr. Matthews, to which Silvertooth says, his booming voice, I'd known him, but not in this capacity. He says, you boys got a choice. You know what's upstairs? This was in the Sarasota courthouse with a jail upstairs. He says, you want adjoining cells or you all want to bunk together? He says, one more of these and that's over. Well, I only needed one exposure of that. I was properly chastened. And I'll tell you that sometimes good comes out of bad things. I learned later when I got employed on a job offer with the W.T. Harrison, Bill Harrison, George's brothers firm in Sarasota, Williams Parker, Harrison, Dietz, and Getson, that Bill Harrison had called Judge Silvertooth because he knew he had cases involving me and others because they were looking for a trial component in their practice. They didn't have that, a civil litigation component, and that Judge Silvertooth had given him my name as somebody that might, eventually work out and so forth. So that was one of these things that happens over the years. He morphed, though, from being a senior lawyer and a mentor into a really, really trusted, loving friend by starting with an act of kindness that he did. Jan had a job at MCC, now a longer name, the community college, in the guidance and counseling office, student personnel office. She was there with another wonderful friend that's just ironic how things happen over the years, Alice Harley Peeler, who in later life met and married Sarasota's most handsome and eligible bachelor, Robert. You know the last name? Yes. Anyway, I'm thinking of his name. Jan, what's his last name? Boylston. Yeah, Bob Boylston. I thought they'd be here today. Anyway, and we had one car. We had to be out there at 8 o'clock. She had to be out at 8 o'clock. I don't have a second car. $450 a month, you don't buy a whole lot of transportation. And Gilbert said, well, I'm right in the neighborhood. He was literally 4 blocks away. You can just ride with me. So for months and maybe as much as a year, at 8 o'clock every morning, Gilbert Smith would drive in his very old Volkswagen with a distinctive sound and blow the horn once, and I'd get in and we'd be on the road to the office. He would never let me pay a nickel's worth of the gas. I'm going there at the same time anyway. And then we talked about things on the way, of course, things like I'd never heard, didn't know what a yellow dog Democrat was, for example. That's one I hadn't heard before. And our oldest daughter at the time, who was 2, the first words I think she uttered out loud when she would hear the sound of that car coming about a half a block away is, "Gilbert's here, Gilbert's here." And after that, Kimbra, the daughter Kimbra, became our babysitter. And Casey, later years, did our tax returns when she was a CPA in Sarasota. And this all happened because Alpha was there, keeping everything together, running everything, the power on top of and under and behind the throne. And we just became close as families and have continued to. Here's what Gilbert gave me. Practical knowledge that even in Judge Dakin's college they don't particularly talk about. Some common sense things like what to say and what not to say. I won't repeat the one about think you're the smartest guy in the room. That's on the video. But he also taught me that when you're in a condemnation jury, there's 12 people. And I haven't done this, and we represented MacArthur Foundation back years ago and did a bunch of condemnation for the school board, which is all because Gilbert taught me how to do it, but haven't done it in a long time. But the condemnation in Florida is the only civil thing that has 12 jurors instead of 6. And his thing in the closing argument says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is boring. It's all about appraisers and little ticky-tack things, the square footage and stuff. But you know what? The people, the Constitution, the legislature, the government of Florida thinks this is so important that 12 people sit on this kind of case because there's only 2 kinds of cases that have 12 people sitting on a jury. And that's when they can take a man's life or they can take his property." And I mean, they got real serious about being bored for 5 days after hearing that. And I was still using it all these years later. The second thing is the final resort argument to give when you are have nothing else to say to a point that's been made that won't be countered quickly. And your final go-to argument in the closing argument says, "Ladies and gentlemen, that point there that those people are talking about, that they keep harping on, it's just ridiculous. I know it's just ridiculous, and you know it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous." It says, "Sit down and hope for the best." So, self-deprecation. Self-deprecation was Gilbert. And I'm telling this because at Virginia Lambeth, his sister's funeral some years ago at Palmasola Presbyterian, he told this story on himself, so I'm not talking about him. Gilbert was the youngest of 3 children. Chesterfield Smith was the oldest, and Elizabeth was next, and then Gilbert. And they all went to DeSoto County High School, which is established in like 1922. Chesterfield Smith, the brother, graduated from there. Of course, later went on to be president of the Florida Bar, president of the American Bar, and a major figure in the jurisprudence in the United States forever. And the high school principal has got Gilbert in the office discussing these things when Gilbert graduated. And he said, "You know, your brother Chesterfield graduated, I think he's the second highest GPA average in the last few years at DeSoto County High School." And he went on, and you know what a great job he's done. Says, in your sister, Virginia, she graduated from DeSoto County School, and at the time that she graduated, she had the highest grade point average of any person that had ever been to school there, women or men. And says, and then, "Gilbert, I've looked at your transcript here as you graduate." Says, "What happened to you, boy?" So he was just like that. He loved to tell stories about himself. And and again, I want to talk about the family a little bit. They're just great. They were with Alpha as their leader. She has 4 terrific children, and they've grown into 4 terrific adults. Kimbra is our first babysitter, I say, went ahead to be in charge for the federal district of 11th Circuit federal courts over all of Florida federal court cases for years, and then after that, and retired from that service. It now has an immigration law, a practice with at least 2 locations in Georgia. Casey is a CPA very close to where Alpha is in South Carolina and able to visit quickly. And actually worked with a firm that did our tax returns when I was in Sarasota a long time ago. Never did get audited either, Casey, I'm pleased. And then Brooks is up in near Rome, Georgia, where he's working for the United Way. And there's another one, I keep forgetting who it is. The word has it that one of his sons moved from digging endless holes in his backyard with a next door neighbor to become a circuit judge somewhere here in the area. I don't know, I haven't kept up with him as well. So anyway, finally at the end of all this, for a brief 9 months, the firm, which was Die and Die, decided they'd add some names. And for the last year I was there, it was, I had to get with, who's out there, who volunteered, somebody, Dave Dietrich had to tell me, I didn't remember it exactly, but anyway, the name of the firm in the last year was Die, Smith, Cleary, Scott, and Matthews. I just love that. That was so nice. And but as I then got the job, as Mr. Harrison called me about Judge Silvertooth's recommendation, and I decided I'd go down there and start being a trial lawyer that opportunity. As I'm going out the last day of my last box of things to come out, I'm going down the hall. As I hit the elevator, I turned around and looked, and the name was already gone. So they were moving on. So the man was not only a mentor and a friend and a real hero to me. He gave me a lifetime of training and recollections and memories which I cherish today, and a family I continue to love. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamar. This is the first time I've done this, and I was trying to figure out how to do it. I've never had a dedication of a room. I've seen things on TV that look similar to it, but we're going to try. And if you look to my left and your right towards the rear of this jury assembly room, and you can stand, and it's a great photo op if you want it. At this time, by the power vested in me as Chief Judge, I would like to formally dedicate the Gilbert Smith Sr. Jury Assembly Room. And at this time, I would like Gilbert Smith, Jr. to come forward for a special presentation.
Well, it's such an honor to see all of you here for my dad. He was, and I really do appreciate all the comments that were made, but I really appreciate everybody being here. You either knew my dad or you were a big part of his life, or you heard a lot about him. He was a great example for his children and his family, and as all of you know, he loved Manatee County and he loved the judicial system here and all of the judges. And so the person who really should get a lot of credit for my dad's success is my mom. So at this time I want to present her with a bouquet.
Again, I want to thank you all for being here. I do want to remind you that the Smith family is hosting a reception in the front of the now Gilbert A. Smith Sr. Jury Assembly Room for anyone who wants to stay and visit with friends and family, and I encourage you to do so. At this point, I was going to say something. I spent a few days trying to think of what I should say in closing, and I started writing and I started thinking about what would be the appropriate way to honor Gilbert Smith Sr. with words. The more I thought about it, I kept coming back to a piece about Judge Smith Sr. that I read. And instead of writing something myself, I thought it would be appropriate to read a portion of what was written. And in an editorial written by Manatee County native Tom Tryon, who's sitting here, for the Sarasota Herald, he wrote the following, and I think this says it better than anything that I could write. Just as notable about his life, on and off the bench, Smith was known for his laugh, a loud, contagious, rat-a-tat-tat sound that would echo through the courthouse or a hunting camp. He was the teller of funny stories who equally enjoyed listening to humorous stories told by others. In short, he was a serious judge who didn't take himself too seriously. Most important, he was a judge whose commitment to equity under the law transcends time. May he rest in peace, and his belief in equity and justice transcend the ages. And with that, these proceedings are closed, and thank you so much for being a part of them.